Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. So today I wanted to do my favorite books of 2019. If I sound a little bit off, that's because I have a cold. I have a few books to talk about. I think I've said in the previous favorite books videos that I've made that I tend to do categories for the books that I want to talk about because I find it very difficult to just narrow down a top list of the books that I read for that year. I find it kind of impossible to order books in that way or to just say they were my favorites. So instead I use categories as a way to sort of figure out the highlights of the year for me, and they are not necessarily all even in terms of my enjoyment, but I will get to all of the categories as I go along. So first we have my favorite character or my favorite story, and for this I wanted to talk about Circe by Madeleine Miller. So this is a book that has been hyped for a long time, and I never really thought that I would like this because it's a Greek mythology retelling, and I've always found Greek mythology really intimidating. It was only this year that I read Mythos by Stephen Fry that I was even remotely interested in really getting my foot into this realm of literature history. So Circe is an imagining of a witch who was exiled to an island because she had witch powers, and this book is a really close character study of her and the way she interacts with her family and how she's ostracized and how she is coming to terms with her powers as well. I loved her character, I loved her voice, and I just found myself completely falling in love with this book. I actually listened to the audiobook and I would highly recommend the audio version of this. The next one I have is my favorite classics. It is probably also my favorite fiction book because it has pretty much all of the elements that I like in fiction and my favorite kind of fiction, and that is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. So this book is telling the story of a woman who moves with her parents to from this sort of countryside, quite wealthy area of England to a factory town during the Industrial Revolution of England. So this book is both sort of a romance, the interaction between them being very much like Elizabeth and Darcy, but also there's a lot of commentary on the society of the time and the way that people were dealing and reacting to the Industrial Revolution. Elizabeth Gaskell has such a wonderful writing style, and I just completely fell in love with this book, and reading North and South was definitely one of my favorite reading experiences of this year. The next one I have is my new favorite author, or just an author that I discovered this year. The author that stood out to me this year was Magda Szabó, which I read The Door by her. And The Door is a story of a woman and a man that it's mainly about the woman and her relationship with a older woman who comes to work for them as a housekeeper, basically. And the housekeeper, Emerenze, is a very interesting character. She's one of my new favorite characters. And the interaction between the two women I found really interesting. There's a lot of sharpness in their words and in their actions sometimes, and brashness, but also there's a lot of love. And I just loved the way that Magda Szabó wrote these characters, wrote their relationship, and I fell in love with her writing style. So I think Magda Szabó is probably going to be an author that I explore more in 2020. And I actually have one of her most recent books to be published in English on pre-order that is called Abigail, that is coming out in January, so I'm very excited about that. The next category I have is most annotated, and this is another category that I really like to think about because for me annotations is usually a sign for me that I've really loved reading the book. It doesn't have to be a book that I've loved in terms of its quality, often it is, but I think in particular I've loved the reading experience because annotations for me is a sign that I've really thought and argued maybe with the book, or just have really interacted with the author in a more direct way. And for me this year, it's definitely Waterfalls of Stars by Roseanne Alexander, that gets this category. But this book is Rosianne Alexander talking about 10 years living as a warden on Skoma, and she talks about wildlife in intricate detail, and something that I really appreciate, of course, because I love nature writing. And the way she narrates her experiences, sometimes I could argue with her, argue with the choices that she made, or argue with her boyfriend that was just making such horrible decisions at times, and very hasty decisions that she sort of just had to go with because she was forced into situations that she didn't really have choices. Also, a lot of the time I just felt for them and could relate to the feelings that she had, especially when she was afraid of their time on the island running out, and being afraid of sort of returning back to the mainland, and how she would be so overwhelmed by the routines of the everyday, of the sound of traffic or things like that. Because I'm a very anxious person, I can definitely relate to that. So I think that was part of it, that wish to be a bit more offline, to be isolated, or to at least have more space and time and calmness. I think that is something that I could really relate to in her voice in this book, and that's why it's probably the most annotated, because I just felt a lot of things when reading this book. The next category I have is most rewarding, and for that I have to say The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I have had sort of a long process of reading through this series. I read The Hobbit in 2013, and then The Fellowship for the first time in 2014 or 2015. And then I went on to read through the entire trilogy together with Mary from Books and Pizza, as well as Yamini from The Skeptical Reader. So we finally finished off the trilogy in June, I want to say, in 2019. The reason I felt like The Lord of the Rings was a rewarding reading experience is because it's been several years of a project, and I was glad to finally have actually finished it, and to feel like I now have a bit of a grounding to return to it and to build upon that familiarity with the story and with the world of Middle-earth. So that was a really fun experience, and especially to share it with Mary and Yamini was a lot of fun. The next category I have is my favorite illustrated book of this year, and for that I have to go with The Bird Within by Sara Lundberg. This is a Swedish graphic novel that is a fictionalized account of a real Swedish female painter. And I had never heard of the painter before. I just stumbled upon this book in the art museum store. I think this is a perfect example of a graphic novel that is told through the illustrations. So you do have text in this, but the main feel of the book is conveyed through the illustrations, and I thought it was beautiful. I really wanted to recommend it, but it was, as I said, it is originally published in Swedish, but I saw recently that it is getting an English translation this year, which made me really excited, because I think it's a wonderful book, and I think a lot of people would enjoy it. So I will link the link to the English version of this book below if you're interested. But the next category is sort of a slightly different one. It is my new favorite subgenre, or just genre, and it isn't really new in the sense that I have definitely read books in this genre before. I think it's just that I've discovered how much I enjoy it this year, and that is historical fiction. So I started the year off by reading a few, and I haven't read a lot in the second half of the year, just because I've been reading a lot of nonfiction. A few of the ones that stood out to me in terms of historical fiction this year is I Was Anastasia, which is a fictionalized account of Anna Anderson and Anastasia Romanov, and Remarkable Creatures, which is by Tracy Chevalier, which is a fictionalized account of Mary Anning, who was a fossil hunter. And I also really loved The Trouble with Goats and Sheep. So I think I haven't read a lot of historical fiction this year, but this year the the most enjoyable and just thrilling and sort of page-turning reading that I've done has definitely been the historical fiction. And I think I've come to the conclusion that it's a genre that I particularly love in fiction, so it's something that I definitely want to read more of in 2020. The next category is my favorite reread, and for that it is definitely Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I read this for the first time I think in 2014 when I was very sick, and clearly I could have done with rereading it now. But I reread it in connection with Little Women, Louisa May Alcott 2020, which is run by Megan and Kate Howe. I will link their channels below. They are doing a read-along of several Louisa May Alcott books over the course of a year. Little Women was also a read-along that I hosted together with Kate Howe and Christy from the Tiny Chronicles in December. And it was just a blast to reread this book. I think I was a bit afraid that this would be too sugary for me and that it was just the right timing when I read it the first time. Especially when I started reading Little Women, I felt like I couldn't really get into it immediately. I felt like I was not going to enjoy it as much. But I quite soon fell into the groove of things and just felt very familiar with the story and with the family, and just really enjoyed the experience. So I look forward to watching the new movie adaptation as well soon, hopefully. The last book I wanted to talk about is my favorite book of the year. It is a book that has made me think a lot, has had sort of a change in the way I think about the world and about certain things that it discusses. It has just stayed with me a lot and has also been a book that I've been wanting to reread ever since I read it the first time in 2019. And that is The Collected Schizophrenias by Esme Wang. This is a non-fiction essay collection about the author's experiences of schizophrenia in various aspects of her life. It talks about forced treatment, and it talks about sort of passing for normal, talks about a lot of the stereotypes that are common for schizophrenia. It talks about mental illness narratives and the way that we perceive people with mental illnesses, and there are so many things that it covers, but I just found the perfect combination of a very thoughtful writer covering topics in new ways and in ways that really challenged me and how I thought about these things, but also she is a beautiful writer. So the combination of beautiful writing and topics that just made me so much enjoy thinking about all of these things, it just made for the perfect book for me. So it's a book that I've talked about endlessly since I read it, so it probably doesn't come as a surprise. But it is definitely my favorite book of the year, because I haven't really stopped thinking about it over the years, so I think that says a lot for me. So those are all of the books that I want to talk about for my favorite books of 2019. I would love to know if you've read any of these books or if you want to read any of them. Love to know what your favorite books of 2019 are. I hope you've had a fantastic start to your 2020, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.